You're listening to Radio Primavera Sound, proudly presented by Cupra.
Hello and welcome once again to Line Noise, and we have an interview with you today that I really enjoyed doing with Carrier, the sort of, I don't really know how to describe him. He's Guy Brewer, aka Carrier. A long time ago he was in Commix, which is a drum and bass duo, trio stroke duo I really enjoyed, who released a classic track, well, several, but the one that I really like is called Cambridge Hardcore, because they're from Cambridge. After that, he sort of went towards techno with Shifted, and now in 2023 he created Carrier, which is a new nom de plume, and their debut album Rhythm Immortal is out in October, this very month. And so he was in Barcelona playing 2 gigs, actually, on separate nights, which we start off talking about, actually, kind of my idea being that kind of in between these 2 gigs lies the unique appeal of Carrier and what he's done. We talked about that, and we talked about drum and bass and growing up in drum and bass and production, that kind of thing. We talked about moving to Berlin, moving from Berlin to Antwerp, about techno and kind of how all of his influences have now gone into the Carrier sound. And we things like primal and physical sounds, that kind of thing. I thought it was a really interesting interview. I really enjoyed it. And I really recommend his new record. So I really hope you enjoy it. As ever, again, I don't often say this, but do give us some 5-star ratings. We don't have enough of them. That would be lovely. They help. People always say this, but they help people to find the show, and that's true. It's very true. Most importantly, though, enjoy the show. Line Noise comes with with the support of Cupra. Carrie, how are you doing?
I'm very good.
So I was interested, I'm not sure if this works, but last night you played a live gig in Barcelona at the sort of Casa Montjuïc Experimental Arts space. And tonight you're playing at Thumping Techno Club Raz. Is that where you sit? Is that you sort of, I quite like the idea.
I suppose it's like a fairly accurate representation of where I kind of see the project sitting. And I quite like that it's not one thing or the other. And I think I'm in quite a privileged position to be able to do that. Like, I think people have asked me recently because I stopped the previous project and started this, and they're like, so what are you doing now? And like, I always kind of pause a little bit because I don't really know what to say. Like, I can kind of describe it in like a long-winded way, but it doesn't fit very neatly into any box, and that is enjoyable for me, I would say. But yeah, like, I think it's music that can work in either context. And although I am DJing tonight, I've also played live in more club settings too. So I suppose it depends, really. I can do the stuff that's got more kind of momentum to it, or I can strip it back and do things that are far more dynamic and spacious. But the kind of ethos of the project can work in both spaces. And I suppose in terms of sound, like, it is, I suppose, experimental music, but it's heavily influenced by various more kind of like straighter forms of dance music.
And last night, I'm guessing, was probably more on the sort of relaxed side. I mean, it's a seated audience.
Yeah, it is. It was a seated audience. So last night I was presenting stuff on the new album, and the new album, although it's, I suppose, similar in some ways to what I've done previously on the 12s, I did want to take it in a more kind of spacious, minimal direction, I think. So this is what I was doing last night. So like, still percussive, still like beats focused, but in a more abstract way, I would say.
And you said the gig last night was really good.
Yes, yeah, really enjoyed it.
The debut album, Rhythm Immortal, is coming out in October, and we're going to talk about that. I was wondering if you minded if we went back quickly, because I recently learned you were in Commix.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing drum and bass trio, duo, now I think solo project. So I really love Commix. I had no idea you were in them. And one of my favourite tracks is called Cambridge Hardcore.
Okay, yeah.
Does that kind of sum up what you were about?
I guess at the time, yeah. There's nothing particularly hardcore about Cambridge. I should say that now, so I don't know where the name really came from. But yeah, so it was, I suppose, the tail end of the 90s. I left school and went to sixth form college, and I suppose, like many people, you have like a kind of group of friends at school and you gravitate towards each other because you're into the same thing. And for me, it was me and my friends went to drum and bass. Like when I was kind of 15, 16, we were completely hooked. So we finished school and went on to sixth form college and started meeting other groups of friends that are into the same thing. And so three of us who basically were knocking around with each other the entire time, and we go out to clubs together and we take trips into London to watch people like, I don't know, like Optical, Ed Rush, like this entire kind of like late 90s tech step, for want of a better word, thing. Yeah, we just started making music together. First of all, it started off, we were sitting around like smoking a lot of weed and like listening to records. And then we sort of clubbed together and started buying bits of gear. We got a sampler, started messing around with that. And some years later, I think it must have been 2002, 2003, we eventually were like, let's give this a real go, and started sending out demos to people, basically.
I think it was 2002, your first record, if I was...
Yeah, sounds about right.
So I spent a lot of my childhood, my influential years in Norwich, kind of out that way. And East Anglia does have quite a lot of drum and bass.
It does, yeah. Funnily, I mean, like Photech, Source Direct, St Albans, you know.
Easy Rollers, Norwich.
Of course, like it's the kind of Storm from the East compilation. I don't know if you remember that one on Moving Shadow.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, I think JMJ, Richie, and like Flytronic, stuff like this. I mean, it was all kind of like East UK based, Southeast UK based.
One thing that I really love about Commix is the work is quite unbelievably well produced. I mean, like that sort of, I've heard it called post-tech step, tech step. That kind of music was unbelievably well produced in general, and your own production. And I mean, how on earth did you get so good at it? I mean, was it just hours and hours and hours? And
I think from quite an early stage, we realised that there's that old kind of term, like you can't polish a turd. So like we were lucky enough, we met, I don't know if you remember like Newtone, like,
yes,
because we were part of like a little crew. It was like us, Newtone Logistics. So Newtone, Dan Gresham, he was the older brother of like another one of our friends. And he was up in Durham studying, and he was there at the same time as John B. And so when he came back from university, it was around the same time that we started to take it more seriously. He really kind of hammered this into us. He was like, here's a bunch of breaks that are well recorded, and you won't have to engineer them that much. Because before that, we're like, well, why can't we get this breakbeat sounding like, you know, like a breakbeat on like a Photech record or whatever, which I still can't now, to be fair. But like the benchmark was very high. And we were trying to replicate that with sounds that were never going to get there, like a shitty rip of some old funk record that was never going to get like anywhere close to where we wanted it to be. So like he kind of hammered it into us, like start off with the best recorded stuff that you can, and you will have to do less work. I also think like I said, like we bought a sampler. And we spent a long time struggling with this Emu thing. And as soon as things kind of like lurched in the direction of like computer based music production, we got a copy of Reason. And first of all, I think we were a bit sniffy about it. And then we were like, well, hang on, like we are finishing stuff now and we're finishing it like quickly. And we suddenly realized that having like a predominantly computer-based setup just worked. You know, we could come back to it. All the settings were the same. We weren't like trying to replicate like settings on the mixer the next day and like never being able to reproduce what we had before, or like staying up all night working on something and realizing that the mix was trash and not being able to go back to the earlier version. And I think, yeah, like probably 85%, 90% of the production on all of those Commix records were Reason.
Because Reason's quite, I was going to say basic, accessible, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
it is. It is accessible. It had this unit within it called like the Dr. Rex, which was basically like you use this other propeller head software called Recycle, and you just like chuck breakbeats in there, and it did like a lot of the slicing for you. You just like move like a sensitivity fader. And so we started chopping stuff up in there, and we realized it was just like so much easier than trying to do that on a sampler. And we also started to realize that Dr. X, you could also just like get an old funk or jazz record, like record it in, like not a breakbeat, and just put like start points throughout it. And we were able to just like chuck it in the Dr. X in there, and you'd immediately have something that could just play back slices of a loop, which was like really how a lot of those Commix records were put together. There wasn't, apart from like, I suppose the bass lines and stuff, certainly to start off with, there wasn't that much synthesis going on. It was mainly just about kind of putting samples together, basically, in a kind of basic kind of collage type way.
Favorite breakbeat?
Think again, I guess. The shakers on the think break is still something that like I didn't use it for a long time, and I'm quite like tough on myself about like using like breaks now, but like I will use a think shaker. I've got no qualms about that.
So you kind of released the first record in 2002. I wondered what it was like sort of breaking into drum and bass then, because it always seemed to me from the outside that it was quite like an established scene. You had the people who were really big, and it was maybe quite hard to get into.
It's definitely like a barrier there, like very different to the way things are done now, obviously. Like we literally sent off CDs to people. Like I think our first ever release, which was on Aquasonics, which was record label run by this guy called Ricky Blue. We literally sent him a CD and then waited a couple of weeks and then like called up a number that we found on the record. And I think like his son answered and was like, "Who are you?" basically. And we kind of like explained, and maybe a week later he like called the number back and was like, "Actually, I really like these tunes, let's do something." But also I think like I mentioned, my friend Dan, he gave us access to a lot of that. He already knew some people, like John B had taken him down to Music House. And like he in turn like took us down to Music House. We like got in his parents' like Volvo and like drove from Cambridge into London. And like I was just so nervous.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I was so young and like so kind of in awe of what I was looking at. And I like vividly remember sitting outside of Music House in the back of Marcus Intellex's Golf, and like Dan was sitting in the front with Marcus, and we were sitting in the back, and like we put one of our CDs on, and it just like, I think he was playing like New Caliber bits in the front, and then like he put on our like terrible music, but was still quite kind of like, you know, he was kind of open to it and was like, "Go on, lads, you know, like push it, see what you can do." And so we came back from this music house trip with like one dub plate, and everyone else was cutting like 20 things for their weekends, like DJ sets, and we cut like a couple of our things, and we were like, went back and were like getting stoned and like sniffing the acetate basically, and just kind of staring at this thing. But yeah, I haven't thought about that in a long time. But yeah, like an amazing time to be getting involved in that. And I think things now are slightly more impersonal and obviously saturated to such an extent that I think it's much harder to get your stuff heard by people.
One more Commix question. You recorded for Good Looking, Metalheads, loads of other labels. I mean, personally, for me, Good Looking and Metalheads, two of the best record labels. You know what I mean? Like not drum and bass record labels, just record labels. I mean, when you look back, like what do you think was like the key achievement, or the biggest thing you did? Key achievements.
Metalheads for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say like I got into drum and bass in like, it was probably 1995, 1996, and those 12 inches with that like iconic logo on the A side. If you'd have told me then, I would have recorded something for them. Like I think it was probably a decade later that we did the album. I think I just would have had some sort of mental breakdown basically. But you achieve things bit by bit, and by the time that we got to do that, and by the time we met Goldie and started working with him, it felt a little bit more normal. But now looking back on it, that's probably still like my proudest achievement, as part of Commix at least. That and 31 Records, because Doc Scott was like a god to me growing up, like listening to his DJ mixes and like his tracks as well. Like really such a blueprint for actually still a lot of what I do today.
You left in 2012 and you started Shifted, right? Which was a techno project.
Yeah.
Were you kind of had you had enough of drum and bass, or did you just want to make techno, or was it not that simple? Or
yeah, I'd had enough. Like I think like with any movement, you get these kind of peaks and troughs, and it really felt like things had been boiled down and distilled down to nothing by that point. And I think I've mentioned this in other interviews of just having like, I reached this point where I was just like, I don't like this anymore. It's not exciting me like it was. And like, there was definitely a point where I was, every time I go in a record shop, I'd be like, what are they going to do next? What is this next Photech record going to sound like? What is this next optical record going to sound like? And they were like flipping the script monthly. Like the rate of change and the rate of progression was like so fast and so exciting. And then a straight line, basically. And I think at the time we came in, this kind of tech step sound had become extremely boring. And there was this new wave of stuff. Like I mentioned, Marcus Intellects, from Marcus and from Caliber and from people like that. And they were pushing something new, you know? It felt lighter, it felt fresh. And this is the point at which we started to put stuff out. So this was really the scene that we were most kind of like associated with. I don't want to use the word or the term liquid funk. It's terrible. But like, I suppose that's what people would call it now.
Yeah.
Like, and then it was the same thing. It just got boring. And I think around that time, I'd been buying bits and pieces of techno for some years before that. And there was something happening from this kind of axis in Berlin, basically, the kind of like Oscarton, Hardwax, Berghain, the scene around that, basically. And then by extension, people like Shackleton, obviously like T++, etc., etc. There was like a new movement happening. and it felt incredibly exciting. I'd started to not fall out, but me and George weren't getting on as well. He moved to London. I was still based in Cambridge. We weren't spending that much time together anymore, like as friends or in the studio. And so I started to experiment on my own and started to have like more fun with it than I'd had for years. And so I was like, fuck it. I'm just going to do this, basically.
So I've heard it said that because drum and bass is so hard to produce, that basically if you start out making drum and bass, I'm not saying you can make anything. That's obviously not true, but like you've got a very good grounding in like making anything because it's, you know technically what you have to do. Would you say that's right?
To a certain extent. I think there's things that you have to unlearn as much as learn when you step into a lot of the BPMs are so much lower, there's so much space around things. There's so much more room within it to kind of fill or to leave basically. And getting an understanding of that is quite difficult, I think. And I think I had the same thing with DJing. Like DJing drum and bass is a much different beast to DJing techno. Like you're not like double dropping stuff. You're not kind of lining stuff up in that way. It's not as kind of fast and choppy in terms of how you mix. Like longer mixes, letting things roll out for ages and kind of, yeah, it's a different skill set. But yeah, you are right in terms of like the engineering of things. I think it does give you like a good grounding. I still think that my early shifted records sound like shit. But I think everyone thinks that about their early kind of attempts at anything.
They don't sound like shit. Well, no, I certainly don't think so. When did you? So you moved to Berlin?
Yeah.
When was that?
It would have been 2011. So I was still kind of, I think officially I left Commix beginning of 2012, but it was basically earlier than that we'd stopped working with each other. I think it was more like beginning of 2011 or end of 2010 even. I think the last record was 2011. It came out then anyway.
Yeah. And did you move to Berlin because of techno? Because you wanted to be like around that kind of scene?
That was certainly like a big part of it. Like I'd been going over and seeing friends there, and a relationship that I was in for a long time in the UK ended around the same time as me leaving Commix. And I was like, you know what? Like I want to do something else. And I'm really grateful that I made that decision. I think I'm really like, I learned so much from moving away from the UK and kind of immersing myself in something completely different.
Was Berlin really good? I mean, was it great? Were you going out a lot or?
Yeah, perhaps too much. I think everyone when they first go there kind of loses themselves a little bit at some stage. And I definitely did that. It was a very different Berlin to the Berlin we have now. I mean, even when I started going to Berghain, like now you have these like, it won't fucking end until, 12 o'clock midday on like a Monday, basically. And I remember vividly, like when I first went over, like going and seeing like Mike Parker play at Berghain, and it would end at like 8 p.m. on a Sunday evening, which still feels like, like a lot. Still quite long. But compared to now, like it's nothing. Now, like Sunday night is like peak time there, really.
I've been to Berlin. I don't really know it all that well. I haven't been there in ages. But it sometimes seemed to me, again, from the outside, that there's a bit too much techno there, if you know what I mean. Like, I'd quite like, It is the predominant sound there. I think that there has always been this kind of like openness to, well, let's call it bass music for want of a like, it's as good of a blanket term as I can come up with. But certainly when I first moved over, I was also going to things like Wax Treatment, and Scuba's Night at Berghain as well, which I can't remember the name of, Substance.
So you've always had that as well, but like, yes, techno is the predominant sound of the city. There's no getting away from that. And I suppose quite bad, like ketamine produced Ket House as well. Like,
the dream. So in 2023, you created Carrier after moving from Berlin to Antwerp, right?
yeah.
So that sounds like they're both very linked. Like, how linked were they? I mean, I guess it wasn't coincidental.
No, I don't think it was, and it's not like it was any sort of plan. I would say when I left Commix, it was far more like I knew what I was doing, and I knew that I wanted to go to the city and do that, basically. When I moved to Antwerp, I was still making music as Shifted. I made the last Shifted record there during the pandemic. I think that came out in 2021. But also around that time, I was struggling with the way I saw the scene progress, for sure. I'm going to try and not sound like an old man shouting at a cloud now, but things were moving in a direction that I didn't feel I had any place in anymore.
Do you mean like hard techno, that kind of?
Yeah, I do. Like predominantly, like, I mean, there's a lot of hard techno that is exciting and valid. And I don't think it's so much the music, although, yeah, some of it is very bad. It was more the kind of ethos that went along with it, and just the amount of grifters, basically.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm bordering on kind of old man territory, so I'm going to hold back a little bit. But yeah, like, I just didn't see a place for myself in it anymore. I also felt like I was hitting a wall in terms of what I could do with the project. I felt like I was repeating myself. I never want to be like a legacy artist. I would never want to be someone that's being booked for shit that they did 10, 15, 20 years before. And I could see that that was the path. And again, I was just like, okay, let's just do something else. And there's no sitting on the fence. I didn't want this to be like a side project.
Yeah. It was like, cool.
Yeah, and if you need to stand by your convictions and be like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this properly, and this is me now, basically. So I made a hard cut at the end of 2023. I was like, no more Shifted bookings. I'm just going to suck it up and deal with it and like see what I can do here, basically. What's
Antwerp like? I mean, I know it's fashion and diamonds, or am I thinking of a...
That's exactly right. That's pretty much it. It doesn't have really a scene. Very small, perhaps. Not that much going on. I think I like that about it. It's a nice place to like go home to, particularly after spending a decade in Berlin, which is of course like scene epicenter. I don't think that this project would have happened had I have stayed where I was, because I think I probably would have been too attached and too involved with my friends and the scene around us. And I think moving there, and perhaps the timing of that coinciding with the pandemic, gave me the kind of mental space to understand what it was that I really wanted to do. But yeah, it's small. Like Belgium is small anyway, but Antwerp's tiny. But I mean, we can be in Brussels within like 40 minutes on the train. It's there's a lot going on in Brussels. Brussels has got quite a thriving dance music scene.
Would you say that Carrier is influenced by everything you've ever done?
Yeah, 100%. I feel that. I really do. It's like a kind of amalgamation of everything that I've picked up along the way, I suppose.
Nobody likes doing this, but if you had to sort of define the sound, how would you?
This is really difficult. I can't do that, to be honest. I can't. Not succinctly. It dips its toes into a lot of different things, but it's not one thing or the other.
Okay, but maybe another way, like, what does it take from Commix?
Some programming stuff. There is like a feeling with those old records that I mentioned before. Like, let's talk about like the earlier Metalheads catalogue, for instance. And there's this kind of naive majesty to the way that it's written. It's not terribly complex. It sounds more complex than it is. You can't put your finger on why it is that something works or doesn't, but it's there, and it's futurist. And this is really what I try and take from drum and bass in general. It's this futurism. I'm not someone that digs nostalgia too much. And although I might feel terribly nostalgic around those records, they don't sound nostalgic.
Right.
They came out 30 years ago now, and they still sound like the future to me. And that is what I try to take from drum and bass, or my time in drum and bass, I would say.
And what does it take from Shifted?
I suppose the minimalism of it. My approach to texture and the processing of texture, and using texture as like another rhythmic element, because that's all still there.
Yeah. And it sounds like dub's a big influence, right?
Yeah, I would say that I'm more influenced by the things that dub influenced.
Right.
I suppose. I'm not someone that like collects dub 7 inches or anything like that, and I have like a limited knowledge, but I'm obsessive over certain periods of dance music that are, you know, ingrained with dub.
Like Basic Channel stuff, that kind of thing? Or?
Basic Channel would be definitely an obvious one. Like drum and bass, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it grew out of sound system culture, and I would say that I'm not influenced by dub. I am influenced by sound system culture, like as a whole, I would say.
So the debut Carrier album, Rhythm Immortal, which I mentioned is coming out in October, probably this month by the time people are listening. In 2025, why is an album important for you?
I mean, I've seen this argument a lot, and people were like, well, is the album dead, etc., etc. And when I hear people say that, I feel like they're talking more from a kind of a commercial perspective. Because I think if you're like trying to just like build up your career, then perhaps you are better off just kind of drip feeding things as singles, you know, just to like keep the voracious appetite of like consumers happy. But I think from an artistic perspective, it's still completely valid. It's just a body of work, isn't it? And I think you could say the same about like a retrospective from a visual artist, for instance. I think it's like a snapshot of where you are at a certain point of time creatively. And I think that's still extremely important. It gives you space to expand on a narrative, I suppose.
I find it interesting because people, you get the kind of people saying that the album's dead, and that whenever you speak to, or normally when you speak to young artists, what they want to make is an album. You know, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and it's like, well, I think there's something really deeply ingrained, and I also think it's just a format that works. You know, like 45,
totally
60 minutes of music, it just really works. You know, maybe you've already answered this, but I'll ask it anyway. And if you already answered it, then fair enough. But what do you think what do you think your album achieves that 12 inches don't?
Perhaps like a sense of immersion that you don't get with like a 12-inch release. with an EP or whatever. It gives you like I've always been someone, I struggle with albums that do a little bit of this or a little bit of that, basically. And it feels like, actually that was my big issue with our first Commix album. It felt like we tried to tick too many boxes. And I prefer an album that is kind of, you delve into one area of your sounds, you're still able to expand on that and kind of push to the fringes of whatever that subsection of your sound is, but it still has something, an aesthetic around it that has a line through it, you know, that connects each track to the next.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's what I wanted to achieve with this. Like, I think it could have been longer. I could have done like 12 tracks or whatever, but I like things to be cohesive, and I think, yeah, it's 8 tracks, and I think across that, I've kind of put across what I wanted to say with this. Like, the project is still, I feel, in its infancy. I have no idea where it's going to go next, and that is super exciting to me. But this is kind of, I suppose, with each 12, I've kind of pushed more in a slightly different direction. And I had stuff like over the last couple of years that I could have put on these 12s, but I just put it to the side. And those kind of initial few tracks are kind of what started off with Immortal, basically. And actually some of those didn't end up making it on there, and some of them got reworked into something completely different, but they were still there as a sort of a beacon to let me know the direction I wanted to head in.
You said the intention is to create something that feels primal and physical. How do you do that?
I think like the whole, I'm not going to say concept because it's certainly not like a concept album, but my kind of idea around the record, I kept on thinking about how far things have mutated since I was introduced to dance music, how things are deconstructed and put back together, and you get these new forms of things that still have this innate like gene within them that is still from something years past, decades past, centuries past. And I think it's something very like human. And so when I say physical, I mean almost more something that is just linked to our humanity. And I think the fact that that is still growing and changing, and this is what I find exciting about, I don't want to say experimental music, but kind of like rhythmic music as a whole, basically. We are still finding new ways to flip it. And for me, like, yeah, I suppose that's what I'm trying to say with that statement.
Apologies for reading back something you said. But you said another thing which I found very interesting. I'm interested in what happens when different materials strike each other. The way an object sounds depends a lot on how you excite it. Could you expand on that? I mean, what do you mean?
Yeah, this is a physical modeling terminology, basically. Also like car plus synthesis, which is essentially physical modeling too. And yeah, like the whole idea with physical modeling is it's supposed to recreate like the way that materials sound when they are struck by different surfaces. When something is struck by felt, it sounds a lot different to how it will sound if you hit it with a rock or a spoon or whatever, you know? Like metal on metal sounds very different to like felt on metal, whatever. And this is something that I find very interesting and something that I've delved into a lot with Carrier Records. The kind of genesis is less important than what comes out the other end, basically. So like, I'll start off with something that might be a sound that is completely done within electronic music, like a hi-hat from an 808. And even if I'm not using physical modeling, sometimes I'll work out that it's only really like the very start, like attack transient portion of that 808 that I'm interested in. But it's actually the reverb tail that's like doing the work for me. And like that transient fed through, say, a reverb and then quite extreme distortion or other processes, spectral processing, whatever, can end up being something that sounds like a cymbal. This is just an example.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really like a large part of the process for me is just like making unusual sounds, often by using very tiny little portions of them. Be it just like triggering like a tiny little click, or using stuff like granular processing to have many tiny little fragments of sounds that then will be fed into something like Ableton's collision, whatever. And then that might be 100% wet. So really what I'm just getting from that is the sound of this granular texture exciting this thing. And then I'll record the output of that, process it more, etc., etc. And it's kind of delving into things on like an almost microscopic level and just seeing what you come out with, and then resampling that, and then perhaps using a few of those sounds to create something that almost resembles a breakbeat, and then resampling that, and then chopping that up as I used to with like a funky drum or an amen break or whatever, basically, and programming from there. So it's really to do with like the process of how I get from not A to B, it's A to Z, really. It's very convoluted.
Well, I'm wondering, when you make music, are you the type that kind of thinks about it before? Like, do you kind of think, I want to do this, I want to do X, Y, and Z? Or do you tend to just sort of sit down, turn on the machines and sort of start working your way out there?
I would say probably the latter, to start off with at least. Like, it's hard to go in with like a predefined idea of what you want to do. And certainly when I do that, I often come up with something that's completely the opposite. I have sessions where I go in and I'm like, I have no idea what I want to do, just mess around, record a bunch of stuff. And then it will get to a point and I'll be like, that is a structure of like a thing, you know? And at that point, I kind of know that I can take it in certain directions, and it will be more about the kind of the garnish, the window dressing, basically, that will like push it in either direction.
Because you know you've got it.
Yeah, you know you've got that fundamental thing, and sometimes like it will take me a long time to get from that fundamental to a place where I feel like it's starting to sound like a track.
When you have that fundamental, do you know that track is going to be good? Like, you can't mess it up? Or are you still in a stage where you could do something and mess it up?
Oh, you definitely still can. And like, I've got like hundreds of things that I know I will never finish because I just can't quite get it right. And then sometimes I'll open up a project from a year or 2 years previously and I'll be like, oh, I only really needed to like delete 6 of those channels and add one thing and it's done. But it's the process of like having to get very close to something. But then when you are that close, sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees, basically. And you need to take that step back, let it kind of ferment a little bit, forget about it, and then you'll discover it again. Or sometimes I'll just be like, this is bullshit, but that one sound is really good. And actually, if I just copy that sound and put it on something else that I've been working on, it's done. And it will just like click. And that is like still the most magical feeling, is like that click moment.
I'm just thinking how massively satisfying it must be to go back into something you did 6 months before that couldn't work, and then just be like, or that didn't work, and then just be like, oh no, that's it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's really like, I think that feeling is still why I do this. And I suppose many people would say the same thing. It's it's that buzz where you just get into this state. And because even some of these kind of half finished ideas, they'll just be a loop. It'll be like 16 or 32 bars. And like, I'll just like less than half an hour. And I'm like, it's a tune now. And like, all I really need to do is do some mix work and bits and pieces and some finessing, and it's there. And like that state where you're not even really thinking about it is the most exciting thing to me about making music, for sure.
One of my favourite songs on the album is That Veil of Yours with voice actor, who is an artist I've heard of but not really familiar with entirely. Who are they and how did you work with them?
Okay, so I think Noah hasn't been around that long. The first thing I heard, which may have been the first thing that she put out properly as voice actor, came out on Stroom, which is actually a Belgian label. And it's like a colossal package of about like 50 tracks or whatever. And I think there was like one night and it was me and some friends over at my place. I can't remember what we were celebrating or if we were celebrating anything at all, but I think it was like a bit messy. And like, I think I put it on and like 3 hours later, I was like, we are still listening to this and it still sounds incredible. So I think the idea of kind of working with her, I think as soon as I heard that, I was like, I think I would love to do something. And then when it came to doing the album, I think I sent it to Shlom at Modern Love and he came back and he was like, I think we're almost there, but like, what about a vocal on one thing, basically? And like, I kind of wanted to do that and I'd attempted, but it hadn't worked out. I'm quite awkward, and sometimes like approaching people about like collaborating on things, it's quite a difficult thing to do, you know, when you're as socially awkward as I am. So anyway, like Shlom hit up Ziggy Nose Drip, who runs Stroom, and he introduced us, and I think I explained how short on time we were, and I think I got the vocal back like maybe 48 hours before the mastering date, and it just worked.
Yeah. I want to sort of talk a bit about musical listening, because I used to listen to loads of drum and bass, like you. You know, when I was younger, and I had a time when I kind of went off it a bit, and there were many years when I didn't listen to much drum and bass, much jungle, and recently I've been listening to quite a lot more. How about you? Like, what are you listening to at the moment? Are you still listening to those old kind of jungle drum and bass tunes? You still listen to the techno? What?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of new music. It tends to be more the stuff in kind of like experimental zone, let's call it, like, for want of a better kind of blanket term again. That tends to be the stuff that I buy often now. Beyond that, in terms of old music, I listen to stuff like Basic Channel religiously. I listen to drum and bass religiously, particularly, you know, stuff like Photex, Source, etc. That era, for me, I find it incredibly exciting and incredibly inspiring. I'd say I have like quite wide music tastes. I just kind of absorb things, and I'm someone that gets quite obsessive over something. When I'm very into something, I kind of have to have it all, and I have to absorb it all, and then I don't just want to listen to that thing, I also want to know what influenced them, and then I have to listen to all of that. And it's, I suppose you just soak it up, basically. And I think, although like obviously I'm not like trying to copy anything, it's, I think we are our experiences and the things that kind of impact us most along the way, basically. And I think it's what you expose yourself to musically is always going to filter through into what you do. And
the album's out in October. What have you got coming up? Live dates, DJing, kind of mixture of the two? Like
a mixture of the two, predominantly live stuff. I'm very happy to see things moving in terms of like performances and stuff, and it honestly feels like amazing to be given a third go round the merry-go-round, basically, before I'm spat off again at some point. But for now, it's like very exciting, and I feel kind of very energized by the whole thing.
Guy, thank you so much.
Thank you
for taking the time. It was an absolute pleasure.
Likewise.
Oh, and congratulations on the album as well.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
You're listening to Radio Primavera Sound, proudly presented by Cupra.